My name's Chad Ordzek with the EPS Corporate Communications, and I'll be your moderator for the media availability today. For today's program, we'll have Staff Sergeant Patrick Rosage and Chief Dale McPhee speak, followed by the council co-chairs Zaki Hirabi and Todd Heron, as well as Christy Pace, who's the former co-chair and the EPS Indigenous Relations Coordinator. Afterwards, we'll follow up with media questions and answers, and I'll call on media outlets one at a time. We ask that you keep your questions related to the community councils. If you have any questions on any other topics, please contact our EPS Media Relations and we'll get back to you on those. Just a quick reminder to all participants to keep their microphones muted till they're called upon to speak, as this will help to minimize the background noise and echo. Before we begin, I'd like to take a few moments to formally acknowledge the land and territory we stand on together. We are located in Amiskwaci, Waskahigan, or Beaver Hills on Treaty 6 territory and Métis Region 4, which has been the traditional homelands and gathering grounds of Indigenous peoples for centuries. We honor the commitment made through these treaties to the Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Blackfoot, Papas-Chase, Nakota Sioux, and the Métis peoples and all their descendants. With this acknowledgement, we are making a commitment to understand and appreciate the history of Indigenous peoples and to respect one another as we move forward together as one community. Without further delay, I now pass you to Staff Sergeant Patrick Rosage. Patrick?
Thank you, Chad, and good morning all. My name is Staff Sergeant Patrick Rosage with Edmonton Police Community Relations Section. Joining us here today, Chief Dale McPhee, Christy Pace, EPS Indigenous Relations Advisor and former co-chair of the Niso-Kamakwin Council, Zaki Hirabi, co-chair of the Chiefs Community Council, and Todd Heron, the co-chair of the Sexual Orientation, Gender, Identity, and Expression Council, also known as SOGI. On behalf of the Edmonton Police Service, it's my pleasure to welcome you as we introduce our 3 new councils or community advisory councils. A few years ago, EPS began reviewing its advisory council model. At the time, there were 8 community liaison committees, each representing a particular demographic or identity. However, a review found that the model did not allow for meaningful collaboration and problem solving. Moreover, these communities had a deeper desire for action and sought to be more involved in community policing. EPS revisited its mechanisms for engaging and consulting with the community and developed a broader, more inclusive, intersectional forum for diverse communities to collectively identify issues and find solutions. 3 new community advisory councils were formed to support EPS, each with a specific purpose. The Niso-Kamakwin Council to help EPS with addressing the inequities and barriers Indigenous people face, and with implementing the policing recommendation from national reports such as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada and the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. The Sexual Orientation, Gender, Identity, and Expression Council, which is also known as SOGI, to guide EPS in supporting members of the 2S LGBTQ+ community and with putting the EPS 2S LGBTQ+ community feedback report into practice. And the Chiefs Community Council to assist EPS in shaping policies and procedures related to all communities, and with applying the recommendations from the EPS Commitment to Action feedback report that we released back in November. Despite the challenges of the pandemic, all the three councils are now in place, representing a diverse range of voices, perspectives, and experiences from the community. The councils will be advising and engaging with EPS on issues and changes. And I would like to invite Chief Dale McPhee to say a few words about that. Chief?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Tonse, good morning. This is a pretty great day, certainly for me, and certainly something that's come to fruition. It's been a long time coming, to be honest, and the reason, obviously, for a lot of that is COVID. I'm happy to be joined with many folks on this call, some of our co-chairs, to actually look at how we can start to look at making a difference and making our community not only a safer place, but a better place to live, work, and play. I want to take a minute, though, to recognize our council co-chairs, as Patrick's articulated. On the line, of course, we have Zaki Harabe. Zaki, I still remember when I first met Zaki, it was our first commitment to action meeting. A young man who does a lot of work with youth that stood out, and he had the courage and the leadership to actually speak what needed to be heard, told us things that we need to hear, not necessarily what we want to hear. And I'm so proud that he's taken the lead on the Chiefs Community Council. Todd Herron of the Sexual Orientation, Gender Identity and Expression Council. Todd brings the voice of calm, brings the voice of reason. He brings meaningful things, as he said, to do meaningful work to actually make our community a better place, and understanding, helping not only the police service understand, but the community understand some of the inequities and injustices that were done and how we can find a path forward. To me, reconciliation is about the path forward, and Todd very much exemplifies that. Two of our chairs aren't here, unfortunately. They're busy and tied up, but James and Henry and Laura Ann Washington from the Nisokamiku Council, they, I was fortunate to go to a first meeting with Christy and our team here with probably about a month ago, first in-person meeting I think that we've had, well, it was, and the power of the language and the power of experience and the power of wanting to do things differently and make our communities a better place is just something that stuck with me. And those are the things, unfortunately, COVID's not allowed us to do. But we are now at that place with things opening up that I think we have some real progress to make, and having Christy speak on their behalf and the work that she's done in this, and now having the ability to say how proud I am to have Christy working for EPS, to work with us from the inside out, but having the knowledge of the community to work outside in as well. With the worldwide calls, challenges to policing from a few years ago, and they continue, we saw a need for community engagement, our commitment to action, what we spoke about several times with several community meetings, several thousand contacts online. When we launched that commitment to action, we basically listened, but we learned a lot. And although we heard things that sometimes were hard to hear, things that we needed to hear, what they were all focused on is solutions and path forward. And I think that's the real strength of Edmontonians, and that's the strength of these councils. These councils aren't just checking a box. These councils are giving them meaningful input for me personally to listen to them, to get advice so we make the right decisions, or at least decisions that we've looked at beyond just the Edmonton Police Service. And these folks provide us with that opportunity. It's a very dynamic councils, all of them. We stacked with various opinions, various experiences, and it's those various opinions and various experiences which creates diversity, and diversity which creates strength to not only the Edmonton Police Service, but the city of Edmonton. Our new EPS advisory councils are born out of the same approach of focusing on the issues, listening to diverse communities, and collaborating and solving problems together. The community is changing. We've seen that. I mean, some would argue that the world's a bit upside down right now, and we need leadership and voices of calm to bring some stability back. That's what I believe these councils do for the Edmonton Police Service and for the city of Edmonton. As I said, now that COVID's finally opening up, I've now had the opportunity to speak personally with our councils. It's a pleasure to meet such passionate and talented community advocates that want to make thoughtful, tangible, long-term systemic change. Not work on a program, not try a one-off, but they want to have a continuum of services that we're taking steps to always continue to put our best foot forward and make ourselves better. With their input, I believe the future's bright. With their guidance, I think we have the ability to make less mistakes and get things right quicker. And so I think that's what really resonates with me. This is going to take work. I said many, many times over when we committed to action or commitment to action, it wasn't a one-off. It wasn't going to be a one and done. And that's why these councils are here, to making sure that we continue to do that and how we engage our communities. And hearing some of the stories that I've heard along the way in those commitment to actions, we have the ability to hit the ground running. And I think we already have with many of the changes that we made. And these councils further afford us the opportunity to do things at an expedited rate, but in a meaningful, thoughtful rate. And I've always learned early on, communities have said nothing to us without us. And I think these councils reflect that. So I'm excited. It's a great day. I look forward to working with each and every one of our councils as they reflect our community. And as I said, I want to thank each and every one of them for committing their time to work with us, to provide guidance, to provide direction. It's funny because one of them I was at the other day and I said, I even want to talk about how do we budget for the things that could make a difference from an outcomes perspective, and how can you help us with that so those communities can not only survive but thrive. So that's enough from me. As you can see, I'm a bit passionate, a bit excited about this work, but more so I'm excited to work with the people that are involved, and certainly including our internal team led by Patrick and many others that have done a lot of great work in this area. So thank you. Hi, and I look forward to questions later.
Thank you, Chief McPhee. And just before we go to questions from the media, I would like to ask Zaki Hirabi with the Chiefs Community Council and Todd Heron with the SOGI Council if they had any comments before we go to any media questions. Zaki, go ahead.
Thank you everyone for coming in today to meet with us. I don't have much of an opening statement, but other than just looking forward to answering all your questions. In terms of taking this role, I want to thank the chief for having faith in me, as well as all the committee for having faith in me in co-chairing this new committee. It's going to be a very difficult task because we're going in with new ideas and new phase of strategies, and just looking forward to making a change. I think speaking on behalf of the community is one of the most important things. And I always stated from the beginning when I joined, which is to always have the voice of the youth, which is what I usually work with within the school settings. And just bringing all their ideas forward and a lot of things that they see that have changed over time. So thank you so much to everybody who has come today to really look at what we have to provide in terms of our community. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you, Zaki. Todd Heron, I just want to maybe give everyone a bit of a history of how we got to this point. I've been involved with the Sexual and Gender Minorities Community Liaison Committee for about 10 years, and that was the precursor to the current SOGI committee. And one of the problems with the previous structure is the approach to engaging with communities was we were waiting for people to report incidents, and we weren't going out and seeking what those incidents and issues were in a proactive way. So that left us open to a number of blind spots, and the new structure and the new mandates of the committees are deliberately structured to remove a lot of those blind spots. We're now going to do, I think, much more meaningful consultations with marginalized communities. We're going to go in a lot deeper. We're going to be a lot more focused and targeted in where we go. The SOGI committee will provide advice on those consultations. And then the EPS is going to look at the information that these consultations surface, and then figure out what initiatives it wants to move forward on and which ones will have the best outcomes. And in that regard, SOGI will provide its advice on the development of those initiatives, provide some advice on how it's being received in the community, and even some advice on how the evaluations are being done. And from all of that, as the dialogue improves and becomes more meaningful, we'll start to uncover more areas where we can do more work and improve relations. So I'm really excited about the new structure. I think it's going to be far more effective to people on the ground level.
Thank you, Todd and Zaki. And like the chief said, the co-chairs of NISOC Makwen, they couldn't, unfortunately, couldn't make it here today. However, we do have Christy Pace, who was a former co-chair of the NISOC Makwen. Christy, do you have any few words there you can share?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. I have a statement on behalf of the Niso-Gamakuin Council that I'll share in a few moments, but just a little bit of history. I also sat on the Indigenous Liaison Committee for about a decade, and previous to my move to coming over to EPS, and similar to Todd, you know, the old model of ICLC, we did do some great work in that council. However, the Niso-Gamakuin Council will have more of a reach in terms of how we look at policies and change the things that impact our community, and in particular our Indigenous community. So that's quite exciting for us to be able to have a larger impact and to be more involved in how that process is done. And so we're excited to have the Niso-Gamakuin Council. It's about a year that we've been in operation. We started planning late in November 2020, and we started our council in a very beautiful way. We started with a grounding session and then ceremony, and our council is based on, you know, our traditional ways of knowing and doing. I'll share the statement from the council, if that's okay. So the statement from the Niso-Gamakuin Council, which means the act of helping. So Niso-Gamakuin is the act of helping in Cree. The Niso-Gamakuin Council is made up of diverse people of the Indigenous community. They were all selected to be on the council based on their subject matter expertise, lived experience, and their desire to have a hand in creating tangible, meaningful policy changes for Indigenous people and their experiences with the Edmonton Police Service. So one of the quotes we have is, "We need to recognize the relationship between EPS and the Edmonton Indigenous community is still in the process of healing and repairing damage of past harms." And there's an analogy used that often for reconciliation is that of a good marriage. Like any relationship, it requires the buy-in and hard work of all parties to move forward. It must be based on the foundation of respect, wherein those disenfranchised can be made to feel as equals. Furthermore, reconciliation is only a word if not followed by deliberate and meaningful actions. The council is dedicated to the work and meet regularly despite the challenges of the COVID pandemic. Over the last year, the council has been deliberating on priorities to support Indigenous equity and building on a foundation of meaningful partnership with the EPS.
Thank you, Christy. And now I would like to ask Chad to help us moderate any questions media may have. Over to you, Chad.
Thank you, Patrick. So we're moving on to the media, onto Zoom here. Of course, each media outlet will be given one question and a follow-up before moving to the next media outlet. When everyone's had a turn, we can move to a second round of questions if needed. I'd like to start by calling on Sarah Ryan with Global News. Sarah, are you there?
I am. Hello, everyone. My first question is, I'm looking for each of the representatives of each council to give me some practical examples of what you're going to be doing. It's nice, you know, we hear a lot of talk about some overarching ideas, but like a practical example, what is your council pushing for? For example, Todd had said, you know, that we were waiting for reports to come in. Now we're going to go out and seek incidents like that. That to me is a practical example. Can everyone try and give us a couple of those so we can really understand what is going to change here?
Patrick, do you want to just start that question or start responding to that? I'll give you or Christy the first crack at it, and then we'll give it to the councils.
Yeah, I'll just pass it on to Christy as a former co-chair of NISA Kamakuin Council. Go ahead, Christy.
So some of the practical things that we're hoping to do is really look at how policing from those 4 reports, the Broken Trust, the Truth and Reconciliation, the Inquiry to Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, and the Royal Commission of Aboriginal People. We want to look into the recommendations that pertain to policing specifically, and then look at how we can change policy within policing to have a change in how that impacts Indigenous people, how they engage with the Edmonton police, or how they engage with the legal system, which isn't Edmonton police, but it follows. And so those are some of the practical things that we're trying to achieve as a council. And we're also looking at, our focus is really looking at how to shift policies and procedures so that it can make a meaningful impact further down, and that puts it into practice. That puts it into, it follows the work when we can change policies.
Okay, we can. Zaki, do you want to add anything, or Todd?
Yeah, maybe I can just add something quickly, Sarah. When the apology was being developed for the chief of police on behalf of EPS, we underwent a firm was hired to do extensive one-on-one consultations with people to understand the issues, to help frame the apology. The apology isn't an end of it on itself. It's actually more of an acknowledgement that we're starting a new beginning. But more importantly, that was sort of a one point in time when we did those consultations. And really what we need to do is create a mechanism that allows for that consultation and dialogue to happen on an ongoing basis. And we have to build whatever that is. And that to me is one of the fundamental building blocks so that we can decide what initiatives we want to go forward with.
I'll add one more. Sarah, our committee is fairly new. We're actually just in the planning stage. But one thing that did come up amongst the committee that was formed is that the access to information. A lot of times minorities or marginalized group, when they are bombarded with so many information, where do you access it and how do you access it? And that has been something that has been brought up because you can get too much or you can get too little. And so that's an area that has been a focus within the committee, and other areas being just the treatment of fairness, because a lot of times when you come in from a different background or a different religion or a different ethnic group, are you being treated fairly? It could be as small as just asking for an information. And so there's a lot with this committee in terms of where we're trying to implement change, but that communication between EPS and community is huge. And so we're trying to see where is the community needs the most assistance and what can we do as community advocate to bring forth to the EPS.
Sarah, did you have another question?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if this is for Patrick or the chief. Are these paid positions on the councils or are these volunteer positions?
Volunteer positions. And just to add, Sarah, what you asked earlier is it's also a sounding board for us. So one of the things that right now we're in the process of doing is doing a whole mapping statistical information. If you remember how we push information out to the public, we are now close to being able to launch that. But one of the things that we want to do is run that through each of our councils to see what are we missing, what else needs to be added. There's so many different things. Like give you an example. When I first went to the Niso-Kamakuin Council, they told me it was quite easy. You just need to hire another 160 Christies. I said, well, we might not be able to get that done, but we want to have tangible input of what will make a difference to the people represented. So yeah, so again, we're just grateful that they're participating in this.
Thank
Okay,
you.
we'll move on then to Carly Robinson with City News. Carly?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking my question. My first question is actually for Zaki. The chief mentioned that sometimes you said things that they may not wanted to hear, but they needed to hear it. I'm wondering if you can tell me what's something you brought up to police that you know is not easy for them to hear, but needed to be said, and how it was addressed, and if you've seen action on this.
Thank you, Carly. So I remember when I met the chief, and it was before Chief McPhee, where myself, someone who's very calm and just tend to do things where with logic, faced a situation where I needed assistance from EPS. And it was very difficult because when the officer that showed up turned the event from me being the individual that needed the assistance, or as you would say, the victim, ended up becoming the suspect. Mind you, I've tried different ways. I've even told Chief to try to look as older as I can, but I still get this notion where people think I'm a teenager. So it was good to see from the perspective of a youth what they were facing as an adult myself. And when I had the chance to express my disappointment with the department, I was able to send in a letter. It took quite some time for an answer to come to me, and I did meet with the sergeant. We had a good discussion of pros and cons and what could have been done better. But my disappointment was that the EPS basically, I gave him the option to say, hey, I work with the youth on multiple areas, whether it's sports, school, or at home. And I would love to invite you to an event that we're having in the summer for you to see what I'm all about, what I do. And I would love to invite your officer to see a different perspective from a community that I've come from, and as well as the youth that I work with. That opportunity failed. And so it was a hard truth that I had to tell the chief, that I was disappointed, because I always come from the perspective of learning. When you learn others' cultures, you're better able to serve them. And so when that opportunity was missed, I felt really disappointed. I'm always in the need of helping wherever I can, whether it's my input. I've done more listening now because I work with youth than actually talking. And so that was things that I've shared, as well as other experiences being in Edmonton. And so with being part of this committee, I'm able to bring forth that. Experiences can help with solutions. And so, just saying things is not going to work. But for me, I always look at it as like, what can I bring forth that I've experienced, or what the youth are still experiencing? So that was the story that I shared with the chief, and it was very difficult to share with him, but it was a very safe environment to express situations that are hard to swallow. But yeah, so that was it.
Thank you so much for sharing. And just for my follow-up, I'm not sure who would be best suited for this question. I want to know what's going to be the accountability structure to assure that this isn't just lip service, that action is taken from these words, recommendations. What's going to be that structure of accountability so that the public can know that what's being proposed is being looked at and properly introduced?
I'll take that. I mean, the accountability when you have volunteer people is they're going to stay there if they are seeing that they're making a meaningful impact. And our commitment to them is it's a commitment to action. We want meaningful impact. We're not looking at checking boxes. So, based on a year, I mean, Christy and Patrick right now are working in that area. Our whole point of this is we need to be able to regularly report on what are the differences we made on an annualized basis, and what can we say we've accomplished to go forward and use the expertise that we've gathered. So this is something I've been fortunate to do throughout my career in other areas, and I think it just makes you better. So the accountability is the reporting structure back and forth, what we can share publicly, but the open dialogue of what's going to make our citizens better and what changes are where. So as Christy said earlier, we have a missing murdered Indigenous women and girls report analyzed, as well as the whole Truth and Reconciliation report. And, the end of the year there, we should be able to report clearly what we've got completed. I mean, and we can be held accountable to that. And, we might not get it all done, but what I want to see is progress.
If I could just add just one piece, from my experience anyway, sitting on the council and as a co-chair and now on the other side, and I feel this is probably similar across the board. These councils are very good at holding people accountable and bringing back that conversation. And so we continuously are working on having that conversation so that we're heard, validated, and the accountability pieces are taken into account, and we look for that movement forward. And so, and also I think I can speak to maybe the other councils. If we feel that that's not happening, we'll have to address it and make sure that, you know, those pieces continue to move forward. And that's, and I can speak for my council in particular, Lisa Gomakwin. We are definitely in the space of working on accountability, seeing accountability, and working on transparency for sure.
There is no doubt.
Thank you. We're going to move over to Carlisle with CTV News. Carlisle?
Hey, thank you. Yeah, my question, I think, builds on one of Sarah's questions from earlier when it comes to perhaps flipping what the perception is of policing as a almost as a community function, because I think a lot of people perceive, maybe the general public perceive, policing as an emergency situation or a crime committed, police respond. How much of this is about flipping that public perception on the role policing plays in a community?
Yeah, Carla, I think that's a great point, and I see Alan is on the board here too. We did a podcast, my chief operation officer and myself with him last night, and there was a similar question to theirs. Policing and real community policing has to have a balance, and you know I've articulated this a few different times, but you can't just be hard on a crime, arrest and incarcerate, or soft on crime, which generally is a political discussion, right? And some of that would be hugs and second chances. We need to do both at the same time. And this council allows us to get into some of those communities to educate and do some preventive in nature. And that's why we've invested a significant portion of our budget into this particular area. Because if you don't do it in both ends, you really don't have success, because you don't address the feeder system through the community building. And then you lose the attention by blending them all together, thinking everything is a criminal aspect. Community policing, in my view, you know, and had this conversation, it was great last night. You know, many of our, certainly our immigrant people that have migrated or immigrated here, policing is different in those particular countries, and some of it is not really, how would you say, way less friendly, if you want to say, or other things than say you would see in Canadian policing. And not saying we don't make mistakes, but there it's very much an arm of the state. And here what we want policing to be is an extension of the community. And those are two different approaches. It doesn't mean there's not a safety portion of it in, but I think it really speaks to what the future of policing and this discussion that seems to be being missing and getting blended and confused. And I think you've asked the very key question there is you have to be able to do both at the same time. And you have to try to get the people that are better served outside of the justice system, keep them out of the justice system, and then use the justice system for what it was better designed to do, which is rehabilitation, et cetera, hold them accountable. And, you know, you're getting some of your serious crime in here, your guns, your gangs, people that are disrupting communities. But if you don't do these at the same time, you really never address the potential feeder system, and you just arrest, release, arrest and release, and arrest and release. And over time, the system gets so full because you haven't done the work that we're trying to do with our councils to build understanding, capacity, and relationships in a community to find people that are struggling, the help they need before they're entrenched in the criminal justice system. So it is a change. Thank you for that question. That's a great question.
Carlisle, did you have another question?
Yeah, thank you. And then sort of building on the chief's answer there for Zachy and Todd, you know, how possible and how soon can we see this in your minds, based on, you know, and there's been talk of even just in this availability of how it has been a lot of talk in the past. Does this feel different to you?
I would say definitely, yes, it does feel different. I think building on what the chief said, this is all about building trust between the police and the community. And it's a safety issue for everyone in the community, because if you don't feel comfortable phoning the police because you think they're going to be a part of the problem or add to your problems, then you're setting yourself up to be victimized. So I think by having the more meaningful conversations with the more marginalized members of our community, we can show a different face of the Edmonton Police Service to them as a community service rather than just as a strong arm enforcement service.
Yeah, and to add to what Chief and Todd said, I'm very optimistic. If you look at in terms of how things are always designed, it always starts from top to bottom. And when I seen the chief being open to finding improvements and being vulnerable with the community and going to all these commitment to action meetings and listening and trying to figure out what can I do to better the community, not just my unit, but the whole community, was a great sign. If at the same time, you know, I stated to the chief when I first met him, I said, bring your walls down is not a sign of weakness, because a lot of times law enforcement is seen as like just enforce the law. And but it is also going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. A lot of these changes have to have a lot of people buy into it. Community has had a very long outstanding, even to this day, whenever I need to call, just getting them to feel like they're going to get the service is very difficult. And so that itself is going to take time, but finding the reasons and continuously finding solutions, and at the same time addressing it to the chief and his staff is the only way. And so I feel like I'm very optimistic because we have a chief that's open-minded.
And I think that,
Oh, go on.
I think I could just add to that. If we want to have the shift in terms of how policing is done, you know, in a tangible, meaningful way, I still go back to policy change and investing in that policy change to create policies that would also invest in our police officers so that they can be better informed, have better understanding of the community that they're serving, and move forward in that way. And so building strategies, goals, and a budget around how we would like to move that needle forward. I think that's important.
Thank you. We're going to move to Sherry Noreen with Wind Speaker. Sherry, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So Chief McPhee, this question is for you. You were talking about statistics earlier, and there's been questions about accountability. One of the concerns that has come out over the past couple of years across the country is the lack of statistics when it comes to involvement between police and the BIPOC community. Wind Speaker's focus is on the Indigenous community. So I'm wondering if those statistics will be collected and made available when Indigenous people are arrested or charged or victims of violent crimes.
Yeah, Sherry, great question. It is in the works. That's something that we're one of the few cities in Canada that's supposed to be part of the pilot that's being led by StatsCan, because as you can appreciate, we need to make sure that it's collected consistently across our country. We are one of the first police agencies to throw our hat in the ring to say we need to do this, but we need to make sure that we do it in a non-threatening manner, that it's collected appropriately. That's why StatsCan, who is the gold seal standard, obviously, for privacy, is taking the lead. And we're one of, I think, 3 agencies that are supposed to be in the first pilot. We're pushing to do it faster. I think the whole country's pushing to do it faster. I think, to your point, a lot of folks have had their message heard. And that's something we continue to push. But unfortunately, we're not driving the bus as per se, but we're there. And we're certainly trying to push it to go faster. I anticipate this year we should see a lot of progress, or That's what I'm optimistically hoping for, I guess is a better word, but it is a federal government / StatsCan led initiative.
Sherry, did you have
Okay.
a follow-up?
Yes, I do. You talk about driving the bus, Chief. What about if EPS police are being investigated by ACERT for incidents that involve Indigenous populations? Will that sort of acknowledgement or identification be made in news releases?
Well, again, I mean, ACERT in particular, once a serious investigation in that process follows, as you're probably aware, we don't own that investigation anymore because it is independent, and it's important that we don't step into that investigation till that investigation is complete. So those particular things right now in relation to ACERT, staffing, timeliness, information are all before Police Act changes in relation to how do we deal with this more appropriately. Timeliness is another thing that's big in relation to that. All areas, in particular, the police chiefs, the police association, the prosecutors, the Criminal Trial Lawyers Association have all said that this needs to have a better process, an independent process that's more timely, and the information is part of that. So we're optimistic that we'll see some changes in that in the coming future, because the Police Act hasn't been looked at for many years. Well, not just this province and many other provinces. So those cases that you've been made about, both on statistical and race-based data, and certainly on timeliness of serious investigations and stuff in relation to obviously how they can communicate it on a quicker manner and also complete the investigation quicker manner, are all on the table for that to be looked at.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to Scott Stevenson at CBC News. Scott, are you there?
I am, yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this question is for the chief. I just wonder if you could expand a bit on sort of what problems or issues you're ultimately trying to solve here. Why are these committees needed?
Sorry, Scott, I was on mute there. Great question. I think it's more proactive than just solving problems. I mean, Edmonton is a very diverse city. It's got way more than its share of social challenges, and it's got way more share of its criminal challenges. And they're not all the same. And unfortunately, they get blended together, and we think it's all about our marginalized and vulnerable people. But there's a lot of vulnerable people that live in the city of Edmonton that don't hurt anybody. And then we've got the other side of this, that there is a criminal element. The unfortunate part is the criminal element tends to prey on these individuals as well. And it's like there's only really two things that matter in human services system, is reducing the intake, which means keeping people out of the systems, and then making sure every off-ramp works. Off-ramps can come in income assistance, mental health, addictions, housing, homelessness, bail, remand, and the list goes on. And where we need to try to do with our communities is reduce the intake into the justice system. And that's done through relationships. And as Todd has said many times, through trust and giving people the ability to know that they have choices, educating them on their rights, etc. Last night, again, with Elaine, a lot of our young Black community were articulating that when they come to this country, they assume sometimes that the policing here is the same as it was, let's say, in Sudan. And it doesn't matter where you pick. So I think there's a whole prior educational informational piece, trust, that we need to build on the front end. Hardest thing I ever heard that almost broke my heart in the commitment to action is when we had the Hoya Collective, a group of Somali mothers say, Chief, we pray to have girls because we're losing our sons to gun violence. And we're losing our sons. That's heartbreaking. Mothers should not have to say that. So we need to go in and build relationships with them early on to get this to change before it does become a homicide. And one of the things that we came out of that commitment action, that meeting, they asked for us to hire a liaison person that's attached to our serious crime unit that actually can maybe has the language ability to speak, but to update them on a regular basis so they understand what's going on with those files. We've done that. I wouldn't have known that if I didn't hear that directly from them on how to implement a change that can make a difference. That's what we're doing with these. What else don't we know about? Because what we don't need to do is follow the social media stuff that's all over the map. I need real people that are involved in the situations like Zaki is every day, like Christy is, like Todd is, and like many others that actually are working with people and see how there's some changes that we can make as close to real time to make things better, to get better policy, to get better process. And then I also need to use my voice as the chief of police to help change the community too. Not my authority, but my voice. So I think it's a relationship where we can use each other's voices to get to better places.
Scott, did you have one more or can we move on?
Yeah, just in terms of long-term goals, Chief, do you see this as a permanent? Is there sort of an end point for this, or what do you think?
I don't think there's ever an end point, Scott. Probably there's an evolve point, and we keep getting better like we did last time. They had councils, that lots of them that weren't existed for a long period of years, but they become ineffective, and we blended. And what was interesting about the Chiefs Community Council, if you take this and you look at it, it's very diverse. And you could take Christie, for instance, and my experience in the Indigenous side of the house. There's a lot of Indigenous lessons that we could be using for a lot of our immigrant communities, so we don't go down the same path. And by putting them on a Chiefs Community Council, and Zaki, you can speak to the diversity on your council because it's diverse as heck, right from academia to lived experience to everything in between. That is a base of knowledge that creates debate, creates ideas that challenge the process. We're not looking for everybody to be like-minded. We're looking for people that have respectful conversations that can actually, let's figure out what one or two things we can do to make a meaningful difference now. Not can we go and study it for 3 years to tell us something that we already knew. What can we do now? So I think it's always going to evolve, Scott. I think it'll always be tweaked. And I think the councils will actually be part of that tweaking. And it'll also be, what are we missing? Let's face it, the world's upside down. We're going to see a lot more immigration, because other countries are struggling. And how do we get in a better place that we're, rather than reacting, we're proactively addressing some of these things up front? Thank you.
We're going to move over to Hamdi with Post Media. We're just running out of time on our media availability, so we're going to try to squeeze in a couple more outlets really quick. So we'll Hamdi, it's over to you.
Thank you. First question's for the chief. EPS talks about these councils guiding systemic change and addressing emerging issues. I was wondering if you could give me concrete examples of the sort of change and sort of issues that these councils are addressing.
Yeah, well, the first one we talked about, making sure that Truth and Reconciliation and the MMIWG reports have, Todd mentioned the apology and making sure how we built that it was meaningful and it actually did something, and the commitment to ongoing. Zaki talked about how we need to, focus on some of the youth, and a lot of these tied into our commitment to actions. So you've already went down the road of everybody in the police service has training for unconscious bias. I mean, let's face it, it's in everything. So unless you train for it, how do you get better? We're already doing a practicum right now with a lot of our not-for-profits where our recruits are actually taking their gun off, taking their equipment and their uniform off, and they're going to work to see what it is helping a vulnerable person or vulnerable with a community partner. There's a whole bunch of these: language, know your rights campaign, getting better with the language services, the liaison for those serious domestic violence assaults, moving $38 million of our budget into our Community Safety and Wellbeing Bureau, which is the first ever in the world, and now having 11 police services in here to study. The folks that you're talking to here now, will help us make those things better. We know they're good. We know they're cutting edge. We know they're new, as Zaki said, but we want to make sure they don't become outdated and they're always looking at improving. So part of this is for us to take information to them. What do you think? Here's some of the results. Any suggested tweaks? You know, we're going to have a data dashboard here right away. What are we missing? Your members of the community. How's this going to resonate in your community? You know, is this going to cause problems in your community if we release this? Those are sounding boards that we now have. You know, it's not going to be perfect. We're going to make some mistakes, but it's going to be better than what we have.
Can I add to that for just a moment? Okay, so I'm an old white gay guy, so I have a lot of blind spots. And one of the things that came up, and this is very concrete, that came up in our meetings was what happens when a police officer has to search a trans person? And how do you do that so that you maintain the dignity of the trans person without compromising the safety of the officer? Because trans people will wear body sculpting and packages and stuff like that for cosmetic and other reasons that might be mistaken for something else that's dangerous. So EPS has taken that issue. They've changed their policies around searches and injecting that into the awareness training for new recruits. So that's a very nuts and bolts thing, but it's a really important thing.
And just to add to what Todd has said there, because we do it in the training level, and then we said, okay, we're actually just making a change where we're actually putting scanners before they enter our detention management unit, rather than do that intrusive, invasive search by hand. We've now evolved into scanners. I mean, they've had them in the airport for years. These are things that keep people safe. This is how people can modernize through these suggestions.
Thank you. And for my follow-up, so I know we're running out of time. So if you want to keep it short, or if you can't answer this question, it was just for the representatives from the different councils, what you think your first order of business will be.
Sorry, Hamdi, was that to the chairs or was that to me?
Yeah, sorry, to the chairs, what their first order of business will be in their respective councils.
Well, for us, it's building the structure required to do meaningful consultations and then populating that, figuring out where we want to target our consultations. The work that's ongoing right now is the implementation of the recommendations from the chief's apology. So that work is underway, but I would say just building the structure to get better dialogue.
Okay, we're just going to try to squeeze in one more question here from Lunan with CBC Radio. Chief, if you have to leave, we can continue with the co-chairs if you have to leave. But Lunan, are you there? Lunan with CBC? Isabel with CBC Radio? Okay, then let's go to James Dunn with 630 Chad Radio. No, I believe that's everybody. I think we've hit everybody. Was Diversity Magazine on the call? Diversity? Okay. If then that concludes our session. If media have any additional questions, please feel free to contact me directly. On behalf of the Edmonton Police Service and the Community Advisory Councils, I want to thank all of you for joining us and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.